Live from the pitch pad in New York City. Get ready to unleash your inner entrepreneur with Pitch Live with Amy Summers. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just dipping your toes into the Shark Tank, this is the place to be to discover how to turn your pitch into reality. Fasten your seatbelts, pitch stars, because the spotlight is on you and we are about to make success happen. On this episode of Pitch Live,
rejection can hurt, but it can also, especially if you feel it's unwarranted, which I have felt in the past, it can inspire, a little anger. And you can be, passionate. That kind of emotion will drive me. And, just venting to my family and my friends, letting those emotions out will kind of allow me to cool down, but then inform how I'm going to progress from there, using my passion to drive me and, where I want to go, and using my own emotions to kind of fuel whatever it is I'm going to do next.
Get ready for Pitch Live in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Pitch Live. I'm your host, Amy Summers, founder and president of Pitch Publicity and Vox. I'm also a hard-working entrepreneur who is passionate about helping you reach success in any area of your life. And I know that is possible after decades of experience in perfecting the pitch and enhancing communication skills, which is why I'm here today and joined by Lylah Patel, who I met when she was just 12 years old. Can you believe it?
It's crazy how time goes. Yeah.
Lylah was assisting me with a national TV segment that I had booked for her mother, Dr. Rudrani Banik, on Teen Kids News, and we needed a student interviewee. I remember specifically, they were like, okay, great, we're going to do this segment on eye health. Now, can you get us a student? And I was like, ugh. So I went to your mom, Dr. Ronnie, and I said, can you find us somebody? And so Lylah fiercely stepped right in, helped us out. And before the cameras even stopped rolling, she told me and her mom that she wanted to be a reporter. So we don't waste any time here. Pitch Publicity. So I made the introduction right away to the show's founder, Alan Weiss, and the rest is history. So Lylah auditioned, joined the team, worked her way up to the lead anchor role, and was even part of Teen Kids News team that won the Emmy in 2023. Congrats. I was also honored to witness another major milestone in Lylah's life, and that was her breakthrough solo dance performance, her Arngetthrum, that she's going to talk to us about today a little bit. And has spent over a decade of study in this classical Indian dance called Bharatanatyam. Did I pronounce that right?
It was close. It was
okay.
It was good though. I think
you're going to correct me for the rest of the interview. I'm going to leave it to you.
No worries.
But her speech that night especially moved me very much. I knew I had to bring her on Pitch Live. And now, at the age of 17, she's a senior at the Dalton School in New York City, where she balances her two passions, journalism, and she is serving as editor-in-chief of her school newspaper, the Daltonian, and dance. And she works as a choreographer who blends classical Indian and contemporary dance. And she's performed in many festivals and showcases, including Alvin Ailey Dance Theater, which is amazing. And she's also performed for the Dance Theater Workshop. And this season, we're doing something a little different. Lylah did not put this in the script. Unscripted. Are you ready?
Sure. Let's hear it.
So I just gave your kind of formal bio, which is pretty impressive considering that you are a senior in high school and the youngest guest on the Pitch Live podcast so far. But I'm doing something this season called Behind the Bio series, just to go a little bit deeper. So now that I've introduced you on your formal bio, can you tell us what's not on your bio that people should really know about you?
Sure. I mean, I think, a lot of my Ford achievements are, listed on the bio, but I think what, really speaks to me as a person is kind of some of my more personal qualities. I'd say, I'm a very driven, hardworking person, and I think that comes through in some of the ways I've shown resilience and perseverance throughout my life, and in the different spheres of, content and media I've been a part of, whether that be dance and, more artistic endeavors or journalism with the Daltonian and Teen Kids News. So I think, the biggest thing I would say that is important to know about me is kind of that I'm a very driven and hardworking person, and also that perseverance for me is really, my middle name. So,
Oh, so it's Lylah Perseverance Patel.
yes.
I like that.
A Teen Kid, yeah.
I like that a lot. Well, welcome, Lylah. I'm really excited to jump into our interview and just discover how you make success happen, or as we call it here on Pitch Live, MSH. And really, at such an early age, I think you're an inspiration. And I think a lot of people tuning in are going to be really inspired by you. So let's start with the dance, because I'm very interested in your dance. When I was also in high school, I was on a competitive dance team.
Well,
Did you know that about me?
I did not.
So I loved learning all about your form of dance, which I was unfamiliar with. So, for those who may be tuning in that are not familiar with Indian classical dance, can you tell us the specific dance that you learned and where it comes from exactly?
Sure. So in the Indian classical dance kind of spectrum, you have, I would say, about, I know there's a specific number, but realistically, each different style has a bunch of different variations based on your teacher and, what school you're learning with. So realistically, you have about 8 to 9 formal styles of classical Indian dance. The one I personally learn and am trained in is called Bharatanatyam, and it originates from Chennai, which is in the south of India, from Tamil Nadu, that's the state. And, it's this dance, this classical dance form that's been around for centuries, or not even centuries, thousands of years. And it originated as a temple dance. So, originally it'd be performed in temples as a way to, worship the gods. And then slowly, it's progressed and persevered throughout the generations. And now it's kind of developed more into, a performance-based style. So, yeah.
Okay, and then I went to your debut, your dance
Mhm.
debut. Can you explain what a Arangarthiam is, or you're gonna have to repronounce that word for me? And what does that represent in a dancer's journey exactly?
Sure. So an Arangetram um, is basically the dancer's debut. So in Bharatanatyam, you have 9 distinct pieces, which you perform throughout the course of, I'd say, about a 3-hour period. You have an intermission. For me, it was done with 5 musicians. You have multiple costume changes. And really what this moment is kind of your presentation, having completed rigorous training. For me, I decided I was going to do it about 2 years before I actually performed. So you have to decide a while before, just because you have to learn all these pieces in the canon. Some you already know from the beginning of your training, but you have to understand them. You have to understand their meaning in order to be able to properly present them, especially, in America, to an audience who may be a little bit less familiar with classical Indian dance. And to me, and in general, I think the moment really signifies kind of not only an emergence as, a professional dancer, but also into adulthood, because for many it's done, in those late teen years, as it was for me, or, in their early 20s. So it's kind of this embarkment not only into the professional dance world, but also into adulthood.
Is there an age that's too old to do this? Is there kind of a cutoff? Is it kind of like in other cultures where you have like a certain age that it has to be done around a certain age, or is there specifications around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like a bar bat mitzvah, in that, it'll be a celebration of a coming of age. But I think the difference here is that there's not really a set age. I mean, you could do it even when you're 30 or 40, but I think at that point, a lot of people are more hesitant because they have other priorities in life, or, whatever it may be. But it's also just a very rigorous training process, and not everyone wants to commit to that. But I've also heard of people doing it when they're 12 years old. So it really just depends on your
Oh,
teacher
oh
and
wow.
yeah. So it really just depends when, everything is right and you're ready.
Because you got started really early. Like, how old were you when you started?
I started when I was, oh my gosh, it was so long ago. When I was 5, I want to say. And I was,
Okay.
yeah.
And was that your decision, or was your mom like, "Okay, you're gonna learn this because I did it"?
Um, well, as you just said, when my mom and aunt were growing up, in the US in the 1970s and 80s, they both learned Bharatanatyam. So when I, was like 3 or 4, I'd seen their dance photos and they would talk about it sometimes. And I was always like, oh, I want to do that too. I want to be just like my mom. I want to follow in her footsteps. So I think as surprising as it may sound just from someone starting so young, I think that choice was really my own and it was something that I really wanted to do. And then, ultimately, as we now know, it became this lifelong passion for dance. But back then, I had no idea where it would take me.
And then at what age or what stage did you decide, hey, I want to go all the way with this? Because I guess you can study it and not do that big debut moment that you talked about, right? Like you could just learn the dance form, but you went all the way. So what made you decide, okay, I want to do the big solo performance?
Yeah, I mean, it was a complicated decision. I remember being very conflicted even until, I finally said, okay, I'm going to do this to my teacher. And then all the preparations were set into motion. But I remember from a young age, affiliated with my school, the girls who would be, ready to do it. I remember going to their performances. They'd happen every, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And I remember when I first started going, I'd be bored out of my mind because for a little kid, it's a really long performance. It's like 3 hours. You're sitting there. It's difficult to understand what's going on, what the stories being presented are. It's a lot to kind of it's a lot to process. So as time, progressed and I got older, I started to have more appreciation for it as well as, more understanding just because my training had progressed. So I think as I got older, I really was just like in awe of all these girls like, oh my gosh, they're just teenagers, they're doing all this stuff. They have, they're doing this and that and whatever else at school. They're so impressive. I want to do that too. And I think also that coincided with, my passion for dance developing. And I think that was kind of when I knew I wanted to be, the one I saw on stage.
It's such a traditional, older dance form. And, a lot of people your age might be interested in more modern type of dance. I'm much older than you, but when I was dancing and there was classical ballet, but like hip hop was really popular, when I was growing up and other things. I'm just curious, how do you make it feel relevant to you at your age? Like, how do you make this such a traditional classic dance seem relevant to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would be lying if I said there haven't been moments throughout my training where, I've taken dance classes at my school at Dalton, where everyone's super trained in modern dance. And I've been like, gosh, like I wish that was what I pursued, not just, classical Indian, because then I would be able to interact with them, have the same movement vocabulary, or times where I wished I learned hip hop or jazz or tap or whatever it may be. But I think what really made me stay grounded in Bharatanatyam was kind of the applicability of the stories we tell. There's a specific part of the dance form called abhinaya, which is specifically referring to the emotions we express on our face and kind of the storytelling aspect of the form. And a lot of these stories, yes, they may be about gods, but also they're about fundamental emotions. So maybe they're about anger, they're about love, they're about jealousy, they're about pain, grief. And a lot of those things can be applicable. So while you may be telling a story about a god and you're, a devotee who's in love with the god and you're, looking all over for them, whatever it may be, you can apply that to yourself. And maybe you're looking for, a potential love interest or, whatever it is. And there are ways to kind of draw that back into yourself, which I've, done to make it stay grounded for me, for sure.
That was my favorite part of your performance. I was not expecting that because I didn't know that much about it. I tried to research as much as I could ahead of time, but your facial expressions and then going back and watching, I was there live, but going back and watching your video with your facial expressions were so entertaining. I mean, I didn't realize how much storytelling there was in this dance. And what was really helpful during your performance was that you had family and friends that would go up and like explain, okay, this is the storyline of this dance, and then you would go do the dance. But I really enjoyed watching your facial expressions. How hard was that to learn? And did you have to get a specific trainer to teach you that? And who was that the same trainer as your guru or somebody else?
So Abhinaya is something, at least with my guru, the way she taught it to us, we started off learning just nritta, which is just the pure movement. There's no meaning or emotion attached to it. It's just the pure technique, like the pure basic adavus or steps, as you would call them, or that's the translation. But basically, with Abhinaya, as we got older, a little bit more mature, she started teaching it to us. And I remember the first class she taught it to us, there were about 8 or 9 of us, little girls at that point, and we were all just like so mystified by it. We were just like, we have to make expressions on our face, like we have to look angry or, whatever it is. And we were just so embarrassed. We were like, we don't want to be made fun of. We were just laughing, it was just, we didn't really know how to do it at that point. And I think it's something that you really have to be vulnerable with because it's not like a normal theater production where you're expressing using your voice as well. It's just your face, it's your movements. And it can feel very vulnerable, especially if you're performing for an audience who may be a little bit less familiar with the dance form. And you always in the back of your mind kind of have that fear of, oh my gosh, what if no one gets this? What if I look incredibly stupid? Whatever it is. So I learned a lot from my guru in that vein and kind of her helping me build my confidence. But when I traveled to India to prepare for my Arangetram, I worked with her guru, actually, Braga Bessel, who's a legendary Abhinaya artist. I mean, she does Bharatanatyam as well. That's, where the Abhinaya comes from, but she's extraordinary in that realm. So she's helped me tremendously in improving in that. But I think both her in connection with my guru have really, brought that to life in me.
It kind of reminds me of like silent movies, which is
Yeah.
way before both of our times, but they couldn't speak. So they had to express so much in their eyes and their facial expressions. So if we go back in time, you could be a silent movie actress as well because you've
I
got
mean,
it down.
that's a super cool fun fact. I mean, next icebreaker, I'm definitely gonna mention that.
Yeah.
I think even so, it almost felt sometimes like you had to act for camera. You know how they always say everything has to be 10 times bigger for the camera to pick it up. And especially, your face is such a small canvas. So everything has to be super big without seeming overdone. So
It's really funny that you bring that up since this is Pitch Live, but when I'm teaching people how to pitch
mhm.
vocally, I tell them it's like you're on stage and you have to use vocal expressions that are really exciting and it's going to sound really weird to you, like like you're being ridiculous, but to them it sounds normal because if you're only talking to somebody on the phone, for example, and they can't see you, you have to really speak through your voice. So in that same way, you're pitching to your audience from stage this storyline
Right.
and your eyes when you're surprised, you have to look like really surprised.
Yeah.
And when you're not sure about something, you have to look, like, not
Super,
really not
super
sure about
confused. Yeah.
So I think that's great, especially I think in a day and time where we are so muted in a lot of ways. Like we're muted online, but we're also just muted in person. I feel like we're not exercising that muscle of expression or talking to people, but you've had like expert training in it. So you should have all kinds of friends.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think it can definitely be very hard to, really present yourself like that, especially in today's world with social media and you have all these different things going on at once. It can definitely be very challenging to kind of stay focused on what you're trying to say, what your message is, as well as how to effectively convey that when everyone is being so bombarded by, a million different things at once. Um, I think with dance, something that it's really taught me is just kind of how to stay grounded, honestly, I would say. How to always keep coming back to home base, how to, find something that really roots me both to my identity, but also to my culture. And I think that has really informed, the message that I want to say or that I want to spread, especially with my, own choreographic works at school and in dance theater workshop.
What have you taken from your experience in dance and the skills that you've developed there, whether it's presentation skills or discipline or what do you think the main skills are that you've taken from dance into other areas of your life? So what is a skill and what other area of your life has it been useful?
Hmm. That's a challenging question. I think the thing that I've really gleaned most from dance is kind of what you were saying. I think it's also just kind of the um the saying, fake it till you make it. And oftentimes with Abhinay, with expression, I don't know if something's going to look dumb. Like I rely on my guru to tell me if it's just overdone or just weird or, whatever, because, I can't see my own face when I'm performing. So I think kind of that notion of faking it until I feel confident, even if I don't feel confident, I have to present confidently, is something that really carried over, especially, with my work on the journalism side of things. I'd say on Teen Kids News, I know we're going to get to this later, but, the first time I went in to read for them, I was so nervous. And, everyone always says, you have to be confident. Confidence is the most important part. And I think, over time, obviously that developed naturally, but I think something that really, was crucial in getting me on the show was, trying my best to sound confident and to kind of embody that, even though I wasn't feeling it. So I think that's definitely one of the biggest lessons dance has taught me, for sure.
Yeah, you probably had all the eye work done for the teenagers, but you had to like get the vocals done too, right?
Yeah. I think also just, on camera, I think my expressions are a lot more animated than they used to be for before I started learning Abhinaya. So I think definitely my facial muscles are a lot more active.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a great lesson too. But
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Teen Kids News a little bit, and segue to that. So tell me a little bit about the interview process. But first, tell us about what Teen Kids News is, just in case somebody's not familiar with this program, which is, I mean, every time we book anybody on this show, our experts, they're, professionals like your mother.
mhm.
And your mother didn't question me, but a lot of times my experts are like, why am I on a teen news show? And I'm like, trust me, it's national. And also, they are like highly produced. Like, I love how they produce all of their segments. They're so in depth and they're so well done. But can you tell everyone a little bit about what the network is and then what the interview process was like with them, the audition?
Sure. So Teen Kids News is a nationally syndicated news program for teens and kids, across the nation. And basically, the main focus of the program is providing teens and kids with news they can use. So a lot of the stories we do are about issues that are super relevant to teens and that they care about. So, for example, we'll do stories on climate change, and we'll do stories on preparing for college and college tips. But we'll also do things that are a bit more evergreen and a bit more lighthearted, like, for example, kitchen tips, or here, try a new recipe that we've come up with, or just little even fun facts. So that's kind of the main goal and initiative of the program. And I think as for what the interview audition process was for me, at least, as Amy mentioned at the beginning of our podcast, she I was on the set with my mom filming for a campaign that she and Amy were running. And then, not even before the whole thing was over, I was immediately like, oh, maybe I could be on this show. I've always wanted to be on TV. So, and then I mentioned this to my mom and Amy. And then Amy was
We were on it. We were on it. We
told
were like, we're going to handle this now.
as per usual. And she just went right up to Alan, the producer and executive director, and she's like, "So, Alan, what's the audition process like?" And immediately, he caught on to the implication of that, and he asked, "Oh, do you want to audition?" And I was like, "Yeah," because back then I was, 12. I was super shy. We were in the middle of COVID. So a few months later, I came into their studio, and all you do for your audition is you just read a little, kind of like a fun fact, a little bit of like a tidbit type thing, just to see, what your capabilities are. So I did that, and they were, not to, brag a little bit, but they were pretty impressed with it. And I was lucky enough to be invited back as anchor next year instead of just going straight to reporter, which is typically the path. So that was a really big honor, and I was super proud of that achievement, which of course would not have been possible without Amy. So thank you.
Well, I mean, it was you, but all I did was open a door. You did the rest.
Yeah.
But they put you straight in as anchor then. You didn't even do the reporter job.
They did, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
Um,
amazing. Now I wanted to ask you, I know in that format, like they put together a lot of stories, and you're really just, the anchor and reading the script. But you kind of got into this journalism a lot. So you've had experience with broadcast journalism with Teen Kids News. You're also editor in chief now of your school newspaper. what's your process? And I know you've written for a school paper before you're editor-in-chief, but what's your process of creating a story or a pitch that you wanna share? Like, how do you come up with that pitch for that? Do you have to pitch it to the newspaper at school? Do you have to pitch the idea before they let you write about it, or you write about it and they approve or disapprove of the article?
Yeah, so for the school newspaper, it's kind of a weird process. They typically, will take whatever people want to write about. But for me, I think my biggest focus, especially as I've gotten older in high school, is kind of just making sure what I write is relevant to the student body. I know my freshman year, I wrote a lot of op-eds that were kind of just about my personal experiences and like, oh, look at this lesson I gleaned from XYZ thing. But as I've gotten older, I've, started to write more about institutional issues or frameworks within my school that kind of affect a lot of people but maybe aren't so talked about. So for example, I wrote a very long piece about the health department, and not necessarily exposing anything, but just you know bringing more attention and awareness to kind of all the resources they offer. I've written about AAPI month and things like that, things that kind of affect the student population, but they wouldn't necessarily know about. And I think a lot of that process comes from just sitting down and thinking, what's something that, is impactful to me and is also impactful to others. What's an experience that I've had that I know someone else has had or that someone will benefit from? And then kind of formatting, whatever idea I have or whatever thought process that is around that to kind of share my knowledge or share whatever I find as best as possible with the broader community. It's kind of my process.
That's really important because we always talk about you gotta know your audience when you're pitching.
Right.
And so I love that you focus on your audience first.
Mhm.
Um, and you are self-aware too of like, how things are affecting you, but then you instantly think to the broader idea, like how is this affecting everybody else? So that is a great formula to have. Is there a story that you're really proud of, one that, made some kind of change because you spoke up and took the lead?
Yeah, I think at the end of my sophomore year, I believe it was, I decided, as I just mentioned, I decided to write a piece about AAPI month, which, is celebrating Asian American history and, all of that. And, through my investigation, I kind of found out that the high school specifically, wasn't really doing anything to celebrate this month, whereas there had been celebrations for, other groups and other months like that. And it was kind of I wouldn't say it was hurtful, but it was just a little bit disheartening to kind of see that, my culture and my people, you could say that like Asians in general, which are a fair number of the student body, weren't being celebrated in the same way. And I don't think it was with any malintent or anything like that. But I think, that article went through a lot of reworkings and there were a lot of people involved in kind of what ultimately got put forward by the paper. But I think I definitely saw change. Like this past year in May, which is AAPI month, there was an assembly and there were a lot more conscious efforts to kind of celebrate in the way that other things are celebrated. And I think more broadly, just from AAPI month, I think there was more cognizance about, we're celebrating Black History Month or Pride Month or whatever it is, and making sure that there is an effort to ensure everyone is celebrated and celebrated equally so that everyone feels represented and included. So that was really impactful to me. That's something I had written, not thinking it would be a big thing at all, actually made a significant change like that.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point. I mean, that's an important part of journalism is bringing light to issues that maybe are overlooked or that, have been ignored. And it brings light to something that maybe, you know, certain populations aren't even aware of. So it sounds like you made your professors or administration at the school more aware of it because sounds like they made some changes. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I
great.
always say, people ask me, why are you interested in journalism? I always say, I like to find the truth that's hiding under a rock. Like there's always one stone that's left to be uncovered or flipped over. And there's always something, underlying whatever else is going on. So I like to, investigate, kind of weasel my way in, figure out what's going on and kind of shed light on it to, make positive impact or just kind of explain, the state of affairs. Why?
And there's so many different aspects of in journalism. Are you kind of gravitating to one right now, like investigative journalism, or do you like more featurey type stories, like you do on Teen Kids News or health, or are there certain areas that you're particularly interested in?
I would say investigative journalism is a big one for me.
Okay.
But I will say I do also enjoy kind of the more featurey type stories we do on Teen Kids News. I think there is just benefit to just having good old information, even if you're not, investigating and trying to sometimes expose something or, whatever it may be. I think there is just a value to kind of sharing knowledge in a positive way, which is really what Teen Kids News does. And whether that be about resources, to help with college or to help find your prom tuxedo or, whatever it may be, I think there is a value in having that source of community found through just sharing information.
Well, we've talked about your dance interest and career, and we've talked about your journalism interest and career, and you've been highly successful in both. But I want to talk about rejection a little bit because I think a lot of people, especially your age, but really any age, they're scared of doing things or new things because of fear of rejection, or maybe they have gotten rejection. So you've done a lot of things that are different and new and probably a little scary. How do you handle rejection, or whether it's a rejection on a story, or a criticism or feedback that may be not positive, a little bit more on the negative side with your dance? Like, how do you handle that and keep pushing on, and use your middle name, perseverance, and not give up?
Um, I think my approach differs in the two kind of spheres. Starting with dance, I'll say, there have been times when I've auditioned for something and I haven't gotten it, or when my teacher, will have a particularly difficult class and she'll give me really harsh feedback and I'll, be a little bit hurt by it. And there are times when, it can feel really difficult to keep going, especially just because of how physically demanding dance itself is. But I think the biggest thing that keeps me going is just striving to not only be the best I can be, but to kind of pave the way, especially, in the Dalton community, with Dance Theater Workshop, to kind of pave the way for those who may not see themselves represented at a higher level. Like with DTW, a lot of the dance performances or the dance pieces are, modern or ballet. And for me, this past year, getting to choreograph a fusion between classical Indian dance and modern dance it was really inspiring, honestly, to get to do that. Because I remember, being in fifth grade and watching the performance and not seeing anyone like me. But I hope this year someone in my, old position saw that. And I think, honestly, if not for myself, if not to persevere for myself, then to persevere for others is what drives me in dance. And then as for journalism, in terms of rejection, sometimes I say no is not a no. If it's something about, you can't publish this story because of XYZ, I'll try to go around it. I'll say, okay, well, what if I change Y and Z? Can I still do it? I'll try to, work around whatever blockade there is, to kind of get my voice out there and accomplish whatever goal it is, whether it's for myself or whether I'm fighting for someone else to get published in print. And I think, honestly, with that, I just keep pushing until I can push no longer, until it's going to be super detrimental to the piece or to someone else or just to, my own relationship with someone. But I keep fighting, honestly, to the end. I think that's really how I deal with it. I just try not to give up, honestly.
Is there a certain pep talk you give yourself in your head, or do you go to somebody for a pep talk in these trying situations?
I think my parents are definitely a big resource for me, my parents and my friends. A lot of time, rejection can hurt, but it can also, especially if you feel it's unwarranted, which I have felt in the past, it can inspire, a little anger. And you can be, passionate, especially if you're passionate about whatever the subject matter is or the content or whatever it is. So a lot of times that kind of emotion will drive me, and, just venting to my family and my friends, letting those emotions out will kind of allow me to cool down, but then inform how I'm going to progress from there, and kind of what for decisions I'm going to make in, a calm, collected manner where I'm not too clouded by emotions, but I'm also using my passion to drive me and, where I want to go. I think they've been really supportive in general. And I think, honestly, I draw a lot of strength from that. I wouldn't say there's a specific pep talk, but I think generally just having that support and using my own emotions to kind of fuel whatever it is I'm going to do next really helps me.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point because that a lot of people could take note on this is that just simply, like you said, venting or talking to someone else. I think it's amazing how it just helps you figure out what the next steps are versus holding it all inside. And I think we can shut ourselves down. Like sometimes I'll think, even today, I'll have some big problem with a client or something going on, and my mom's the only one there, and I think to myself, my first thought is like, she is not going to understand anything about
Right.
what I'm going to talk about. Why am I asking her for advice? Because she doesn't know my industry or this client, and she doesn't know the stakes involved, which I'm sure you have the same ideas that go through your head about like school or friends or whatever. But it's amazing, even as an adult, when I go to my mom and I like spill it all out, she sometimes she has some pretty like insightful answers, but other times it's just me hearing myself say it out loud that helps me kind of work through the problem. Do you find that it's a similar situation for you?
Definitely. I do model UN as well. So a lot of times there's a lot of specific jargon and, context that goes with that. So I'll tell my parents something, they'll have no idea what's going on. But for sure, definitely just getting it out there and explaining it really helps just, process those emotions and figure out what to do next, for sure.
So, as we kind of come to the end of our time together, I do want to talk about mentorship
Mhm.
and leadership because you certainly have had a lot of mentorship, speaking of parents. But also, we mentioned something a little bit earlier that we didn't really discuss that I wanted to share with everybody. Um, we mentioned that you had a guru in your dance experience, and I know gurus play a big role, but they're different from a regular, like, traditional dance
Mhm.
teacher, as one might think, of a dance teacher. In fact, they're called a guru. It is Can you tell everyone, is a guru like having a mentor, or what makes that relationship particularly special?
I would say they're a teacher, but they're also much more. So at baseline, they're your teacher. But I think especially if you work with your guru for a long period of time, like I have, especially as you get older, you kind of start to form a closer bond where it's less about, oh, your technique is wrong, but it's also about, how are you doing? How can we use your own emotions to inform your abhinaya in this section of XYZ dance? Like it becomes more than just a teacher student relationship. I think it's different from, if you were to just go to, a random dance school and just take a few classes and just have your teacher, you're the student. It's something that really develops over a long time. And it definitely does have a lot more mentorship, I'd say. It's where you kind of have a personal stake in both people have a personal stake in the other's lives. And you kind of develop a close bond, I would say, for sure.
What's the best piece of advice your guru gave you that applies, not just to dance, but to maybe another area of your life?
That's a hmm. That's a difficult question. She's taught me so much over the past however many years I've been dancing, but I think the biggest thing that she's taught me has just been, don't give up. She can be very hard on her students. I remember when I was younger, not even a year into my dance training, I wanted to quit because I was just like, I can't do it. Like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough in this class. There were a bunch of other girls who were better than me who understood the steps. And I just had this feeling of, I can't do it. But I think, my mom definitely played a big role in keeping me in class and making sure that I continued, but it was ultimately my choice to do that. But I think, especially as my Arangetram training ramped up, there were times when I just felt like I'm going to fall on the floor and like pass out. My body can't do this. And I think she was super instrumental in telling me and kind of instilling in me, don't give up. I think also a lot of her tough love is love. It's, trying to make me the best she can make me. And I think once I understood that, that's really, it stayed with me. And I think just don't give up is probably the biggest thing.
I like that you mentioned the tough love and being tough on people. I feel like, especially now, um, people have a hard time with that. Do you find that? I mean, there's even a term for it. They call certain people snowflakes because any bad feedback they get, they just kind of melt and then they're out. Um, Now that you've had this experience early on, do you think moving forward, like you would gravitate more to a mentor or leader that's kind of showing more of that toughness versus somebody that's just kind of coddling you along?
I think it's important to have both. I think, if you have too much tough love, it can ultimately kind of get under your skin a little bit and just be a little emotionally draining. But at the same time, if you have too much kind of coddling or soft love, I guess you could say, you don't necessarily get the feedback that you need. So I think, to me at least, I would try to gravitate toward a situation where, yes, I'm getting the training and the, hard to hear feedback that I need to improve, but I'm also not being bombarded to a point where, I'm not able to take it and I'm emotionally drained. Like finding that balance of support and also improvement and criticism.
Well, you've got a great start to your career, whatever that's going to be coming up after high school. Have you given a lot of thought to what you might want to explore in the future and what paths are currently exciting you most as you start thinking about what's next? Is it college or what are your aspirations?
College for sure. I think, those next 4 years will be really important in kind of figuring out what I want to do with my life. As of right now, though, I will say I'm interested in journalism for sure. I don't know quite where that will take me, but it's definitely a big interest of mine. And then I'd say I'm also considering, going into law or kind of one of those adjacent fields. So definitely I'm still, very undecided in a lot of ways, but I think as a whole, I kind of have a general, I don't want to say parameter, but kind of sphere that I'm, interested in.
All right. And as you move into this next chapter of your life, college and everything that holds, and you leave behind high school days, what advice would you give if you were going to be the mentor to students you're leaving behind at your school that maybe you would have given to little Lylah, who was 12 years old? Is there any advice? Would you have done anything differently? What would you say to your friends that are going to be in high school after you leave? What advice would you give them that maybe you wish you would have taken earlier or that you've learned since you've been um, in high school?
I would say two things. I would say first, don't hesitate to reach out to support. I know a lot of my time was marked by that. It was difficult for me to kind of get from point A to point B because I felt like I had to do it alone. Even though, as I've learned and as I've learned to also, accept support, I've learned that that just isn't true. There's always, there should always be a resource available to you, whether you need to seek out that support system or you already have it and it's just kind of hiding right under your nose. So I would say that's number one for sure. And the second, which I've kind of been saying throughout this entire, recording session, is just don't give up. I think as hard as times can be, just be bold, go for it, say what you want to say, because at the end of the day, it's just one statement. You're doing one thing once. And, for example, if I'd never asked Amy and my mom, oh, I wonder how to get on the show, whatever, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I think as silly or as stupid as you think something is, just go for it. Because at the end of the day, the worst you're going to get is no. And then you just move on. So don't give up would be my second piece.
And be careful what you ask for because you might be stepping right into that role, right? Well, Lylah, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you've inspired so many people in your journey and that you're going to continue to do so. I want to encourage everyone to share this episode so we can get more people exposed and inspired by all the amazing things that Lylah's doing. And be sure to go visit her amazing website. You can watch some of her dance pieces. You can learn about this training in Indian classical dance at LylahPatel.com. Thanks for being here today, Lylah.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I know you're going to do great, great things, and we're going to keep an eye on you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on this episode of Pitch Live with Amy Summers. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and give us a rating or review. Your feedback helps us plan future episodes. I hope you were inspired today to get out there, make a pitch, give some eye expressions, give some really let people know how you feel through your eyes. That's a good exercise. I love that. I'm going to start working on that more. As a bonus, join us at inisivox.com where you can get motivated, hone your communication skills, and binge as much mentorship as you want whenever you need it. The link's going to be in our show notes, along with all my social media handles and Lylah's website. So let's stay connected so we can follow each other in success. And until next time, MSH. Thanks, Lylah.
Thank you.